Okay, now we're going to talk only about the things we came to talk about. Anyway, so man, there's just so much about Passover, right? And I was really struggling with where to start. So I think I will start in my Guide to Jewish Religious Practice and talk to you about the second day of a festival. So we know, right, especially in the diaspora, right, our major festivals, with the exception of Yom Kippur, we celebrate for 2 days. In Israel, with the exception of Rosh Hashanah, they don't celebrate for 2 days, right? So why is that? So let's talk about that. So according to the Bible, the festivals during which no work was to be done comprised, well, this is according to the Bible now, 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, 1 day of Yom Kippur, the first and last days of Sukkot, the first and last days of Pesach, 1 day of Shavuot. Later, 1 day was added to each of these, with the exception of Yom Kippur. So 1 day was added to make 2, right? With the exception of Yom Kippur. This practice was based on the way the calendar was calculated in ancient times. Originally, the beginning of each month was determined by direct observation of the phases of the moon. A council of the Sanhedrin sat in session beginning with the 30th of each month to receive witnesses who had seen the, quote, new moon. If the tiniest crescent of the moon had been observed to the satisfaction of the court, the day was declared Rosh Chodesh. If not, then the next day was declared Rosh Chodesh. So when I was in my school days, I was absolutely taught that the reason we celebrate 2 days in the diaspora was because we weren't sure which day was supposed to be the day. We're going to get into that in great detail now, okay? When the court declared the new moon to be Mikudash, sanctified, the news was spread to the people by means of beacons lit on the tops of mountains. When the awaited signal was observed on neighboring mountains, similar fires were lit until one could behold the whole of the diaspora before him like a mass of fire. When the Samaritans deliberately attempted to confuse the Jews by lighting such signals at the wrong time, the practice was discontinued. Those nasty fellas. In its place, messengers were sent to convey the news. This put those who lived far away at a disadvantage. In the case of Rosh Hashanah, the disadvantage was particularly strong since Rosh Hashanah occurs on the first of the month, and therefore no time was left for the messengers to arrive. This problem gave birth to the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, the second day of the festival observed in the diaspora. Residents of places that the messengers did not reach observed all the festivals for 2 days, since they could not be sure whether the first of the month was on the 30th of the previous month or on the 31st, of the same month. Okay, a 2-day Rosh Hashanah was sometimes observed even in Jerusalem, for the residents began to observe the festival on the 30th day, lest the witnesses come and testify that they had seen the new moon that day. If they came late that day, another day had to be observed. Only in the case of Yom Kippur was 1 day observed, since the observance of 2 days would cause undue hardship. Yeah, fasting completely for 2 days, not a good plan. When the calendar became fixed, the custom of observing 2 days was retained in the diaspora. In Israel, 1 day was observed, as it is today, with the exception of Rosh Hashanah. There is good authority for the theory that Rosh Hashanah was observed for only 1 day until the 13th century. Since the fixed calendar made a second day unnecessary, why is it retained? The Talmud suggests, be careful with the customs that you have from your fathers, because sometimes the government may pass decrees and we may become subject to error. That's a quote. So the question has arisen in recent times whether there is still sufficient reason to retain the second day. I have been asking this for years. Truly, truly, particularly with regard to Passover. Would it not be hypothetically possible to restore the original way of determining the calendar? A court in Jerusalem could declare the beginning of the new month. With the modern means of communication, the news could soon be flashed to the entire world. Or perhaps we could rely completely on the fixed calendar, since the fear expressed in the Talmud would not apply today. Halachically, there is a difference of opinion in the interpretation of the precaution expressed in the Talmud. According to one opinion, the exhortation to be careful with customs that you have from your fathers is based on the statement that follows. Sometimes the government may pass decrees. Hence, if there is no reason for the second, the first one becomes irrelevant. However, there is another opinion that these are two separate reasons and that the admonition to uphold the usages of our fathers stands. There is another opinion that these are two separate reasons, that the admonition to uphold the usages of our fathers stands regardless of the other circumstances. Hence, the second day of the festival in the diaspora has become a fixed practice. The practical considerations are economic and social. However, if a change is to be made, it would be unwise to do it unilaterally. It is suggested, however, that the second day should not be a mere repetition of the first. This is how they really solidify that we're going to do it 2 days, right here, that they make the second day different from the first, okay? Took us a page and a half to get here, but here we are. So it should not be a mere repetition, but should be given special significance. Where a second day is observed, the laws regarding work on the first day also apply to the second. The burial, whatever, okay, the treatment of the sick. Sometimes you can make an exception, but what they do, and they don't quite get into it here, we get into it is they've changed the service on us. Right. So on the second day, we add a different bracha. We pray for dew, right? Or we pray for rain, or we change the service. So that's how it's not just a repetition of the first day. So, all right. Let's see. I have so many things about Passover. Give me 1/2 a second. I just want to be sure of something. Okay. We know that Passover holds several different significances, right? Historical, agricultural, ideological. So the historical festival commemorates the liberation and right of the children of Israel from Egyptian bondage. The Exodus looms large, not only for Pesach, but also for a number of other Jewish institutions. Let's see. So I want to play you a very interesting a very lovely and interesting piece from Jewish Theological Seminary. I got this in my email the other day. I'm gonna make this bigger. Oops, now I can't see you. Oh, there you are. Can you see this all right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and let's see if you can hear it all right. Is that okay? Can you hear it okay?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. There are a lot of questions that are asked on the Seder night besides the classic, when are we going to eat? The question is, what's the best question of the night? And I would argue that the best question is the one asked by the wicked child. The wicked child's question is really a verse in the Torah, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem, which literally means, what is the service to you? Why are we engaged in the Passover service? But for the rabbis, this isn't an interrogative question. It's a rhetorical question. And basically, the gist of it is, why bother doing this? And it's interesting that one of the words in this question is avodah. The root of that is ayin beit daled. And interestingly, that root is used in the word eved, avdut, meaning slavery, and it's used in the word avodah as in service, service in the temple, service of the heart. And the Jerusalem Talmud explains, I believe this is what the Talmud explains, that the real question of the wicked son is this. We're claiming that Passover is about freedom. But where do you see that? We've just exchanged one master for another. We used to be Pharaoh's slaves, now we're God's slaves. So where's the freedom? Good question. So to answer this question, I want to introduce Isaiah Berlin's idea of negative freedom or negative liberty and positive liberty. When we left Egypt, we were given negative liberty, which means we cast off the responsibilities, the enslavement that Pharaoh put upon us, and now we were free to do fill in the blank. But there's another kind of freedom, or another kind of liberty, and that's what Berlin calls positive liberty. And what that means is that when we're free from enslavement, we are free as independent people to take on responsibility, the kind of responsibility that we think will better us and will better the world. So if you think about the two kinds of enslavement, or the enslavement of Pharaoh and the responsibilities that were placed upon us in the covenant at Sinai, Pharaoh didn't care about us. We were just cogs in the wheel. We know that when the slaves built the pyramids, if one of them died, put him aside, found another one. And that's really the kind of enslavement that we had in Egypt. The covenant, the responsibilities that God places upon us at Sinai, are responsibilities that make us better people, more noble people. They're responsibilities that lead us to kindness, to generosity, to holiness, to study and thought. And so the positive liberty, the liberty to do that which is important in the world, is really the liberty that we received at Sinai. So when we think about freedom on the Passover night at the Seder, it's important to remember that the verse that is often quoted, Shalach et ani, let my people go, has another word right after it, V'ya'avduni, the people will serve me. And when we serve God, we become more godly and make the world a better place.
I thought that was really wonderful. A really excellent way to think about it. So back to what I was saying, so obviously Passover commemorates the liberation, but there's also, it's a festival of right nature in springtime, of course, yes. So when nature reawakens and the fields bring forth their fruit again, man is impelled to rejoice. The month of Nisan is referred to as HaChodesh HaAviv, the month of springtime. So in Deuteronomy, we're told, observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. So Passover also, I recall, was sometimes referred to as Hag HaAviv, the spring festival. So the agricultural theme was muted and the historical theme has taken great precedence, obviously, right? We still in the Seder refer to some of those spring things. But on the first day at Musaf, we recite the prayer for dew. On the second night, we start counting the Omer. So here we have, again, we added something new. Well, that's the second night is distinguished from the first. And on Shabbat, it is customary to read the Song of Songs with its description of springtime. So let's see. Of course, Passover is a pilgrimage holiday, and that centers around our history where people actually physically went, right, to the temple. Let's talk for a minute. I talked about this last week and maybe the week before. So there are the 6 weeks leading up to Passover, which is during the month of Adar and Nisan. There are 4 special Shabbats where we read very, well, we call them special things, and we read special sections of the Torah and the Haftorah. So so Shabbat Shekalim, which is, I'm not sure, it'll tell me in a minute. Okay, in ancient days, every male Israelite 20 years and older had to contribute a half shekel annually to the maintenance of the temple in Jerusalem. This had to be paid before the 1st of Nisan. In order to remind people of this duty, proclamations were made on the 1st of Adar that the half shekel was due. Inasmuch as Jews came to the synagogue on Shabbat, it was instituted that on the Shabbat preceding the 1st of Adar, the Torah reading would include the passage describing the first proclamation of the half shekel. On that Shabbat, 2 Torah scrolls are removed from the ark. In one, we read the portion of the week, and in the other, Exodus chapter 30, verses 11 to 16, which contains the passage that I just referred to. If the first day of Adar occurs on a Shabbat, 3 Torah scrolls are used. I used to wonder this, how all of a sudden they're taking out 3? What's going on? The first for the portion of the week, the second for the section for Rosh Chodesh, and the third for the section for Shekalim. Hatzikadosh is recited on the Shabbats of the 4 Parshayot upon completion of the reading from the scroll prior to the one from which the Maftir is read. So again, they change things up ever so slightly. The Haftorah is from 2 Kings, which is an account of the gifts contributed for the repair of the temple in the reign of King I don't know who this king was. Jehoash. This Haftorah is recited even if Shabbat Shekalim falls on Rosh Chodesh. Then I talked about Shabbat Zachor already, right? It's preceding Purim. Then we have Shabbat Parah. The third of the 4 Shabbats is Shabbat Parah. This must always precede the last of the 4 Shabbats, Shabbat HaChodesh. Thus, if Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls on a Shabbat, and it also becomes Shabbat HaChodesh, Shabbat Parah falls on the last Shabbat of Adar. This gets very complicated. That's okay. Again, 2 Torah scrolls are used. From the first, we read the portion of the week. From the second, the laws concerning the red heifer in Numbers chapter 19, verses 1 to 22. The Haftorah deals with the future purification of Israel as described in the book of Ezekiel. So all Israelites came to the temple in Jerusalem on Pesach in order to offer the Paschal lamb. They had to be in a state of ritual purity to perform this ritual. Since the ashes of the red heifer were used in the process of purification, this passage served to remind those who were not in the state of purity to take the necessary steps. So again, the notion was the best way to communicate with the people was when they came together to pray and to hear the Torah read. And it was read in the language they could understand and in a way they could understand it. And this was the very specific use of it. When I read this about the red heifer, I don't know that I had learned this before, but I couldn't help but absolutely think about Ash Wednesday.
I once heard in some class that they was a test of a woman of whether she was telling the truth or not, and they would mix something in with some kind of potioned up. And if she drank it and was okay, it meant she was telling the truth. But if she got sick, it meant she wasn't telling the truth. And it had something to do with a red heifer. That's what it made me think of it.
This, I have to be honest that I don't recall learning about the red heifer prior to reading it this morning.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Shabbat HaHodesh, the Shabbat before the month of Nisan, or the first of Nisan, if it is a Saturday, is Shabbat HaChodesh. Again, 2 Torah scrolls are used. In the first, we read the portion of the week, and in the second, Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 to 20. The Haftorah is Ezekiel, which contains a description of the sacrifices to be brought on the first of Nisan, Pesach, and other festivals in the future temple. Okay, and then of course, Shabbat Hagadol, the Shabbat immediately preceding Pesach. It received the title Great because of the importance of the approaching festival. The name is, okay. So he's going over the reasons why maybe it was given the name Shabbat Hagadol. Okay. The most cogent of these reasons, and yet a novel explanation, he says, is that the people used to return from the synagogue later than usual on this Shabbat because of the unusually long discourse that was customary on this day. Thus, this Shabbat seemed great, longer than the other Shabbats. There is no change in the service or the Torah reading on this Shabbat. According to some customs, we are to recite part of the Haggadah, from Avadim Hayinu to L'chaber al Kol Avoyanotenu, instead of Psalm 104, normally recited on Shabbat afternoons in the winter. I don't really recall that. Okay. So I want to talk about chametz. What is or isn't allowed during Passover? And the reason I like to do this is because of what happened in 2015, at 800 some years after they had told us we couldn't eat a lot of things. All right, let's go to that. Some of you are going, what is she talking about? I'll tell you what I'm talking about. Okay. Kitniot.
Yeah.
Okay, so this November 2015. Yes, Susan, please.
We are Ashkenazi and we will not, they will not permit us to use it. People do it in their homes, I think,
Right.
but we can't do it in the synagogue.
Right. So let me back up a little bit for those who might be confused. But Where's a good explanation? Okay, so the Bible prohibits the eating of chametz during Pesach, right? Chametz being translated as leavened bread. Basically, it's referring to food that's prepared from these 5 species of grain, and only these 5 species of grain: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Okay, and those species of grain that have been allowed to leaven or rise. To these, Ashkenazic rabbis added rice, millet, corn, and legumes. Okay, these are the kitniot. It's a phrase, rice, millet, corn, and legumes. There are certain differences between the, we don't care about that. Okay. If any amount of these becomes mixed with other food, that other food becomes chametz, right? And most products that we consider chametz are in that category because they've been mixed with things that are forbidden. They themselves might not be forbidden, but they got contaminated, right? But matzah is unleavened bread made from any of these 5 species of grain, right? It's customary that we make matzah from wheat only, but it's not prescribed or forbidden to do it otherwise, okay? The wheat and the flour are given no chance to rise, hence the grain used for matzah must be kept perfectly dry. Okay, so here we go. So this was the Rabbinical Assembly in the fall of 2015. This change was approved by a vote of 19 in favor, 1 opposed, and 2 abstaining. And Gail Leibovitz here, she's going to be one of our speakers at convention. Pamela Barmash, we asked her to speak, but she was unavailable. But I'm just saying these are real people, real rabbis who still, this is not ancient, obviously. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. All right, maybe not. At any rate, there were also lots and lots of articles in the paper at this time. I don't know if you guys remember. The first explanation I remember hearing was that now in Israel, with mixed marriages of Sephardim and Ashkenazim, right? That's a mixed marriage in Israel, 2 different branches of our religion, that it was getting contentious. Those who said, I've always eaten rice, I've always eaten corn and legumes, and the other who's like, what are you, making my whole house treif during Pesach? Get out of here. So they needed to do something. So yes, Sephardim permitted the rice, corn, and legumes on Pesach, and Ashkenazi, we didn't do that so much. When I was growing up, so my great-grandfather on my mother's side, a very, very learned man, or Orthodox rabbi, came to this country back and forth from Russia, apparently bringing Torahs, finally came over and settled here, spoke 6 languages. He explained all of this to my mother because she was raised in the same house as him. And so she was very particular when we were preparing for Pesach. And she always, my sisters and I would make a fuss about this. Like, this is ludicrous. Why are we still doing this? And, the only answer was that a long, long time ago, the way these grains were processed, it was very common for them to get mixed together. And we would say, yeah, well, that's not the case anymore. That's just so old fashioned. Forget about it. But we didn't make a change until, I will tell you honestly, 2016, I started to make a change. So, okay. I'm not sure if we should read all this or not. We'll get started. So on its face, chametz and matzah might serve as a metaphor for polar opposites, but in fact, that is not the case. Rather, They were understood from the first to be opposite sides of a coin. Only that which can become chametz can be used to make matzah, and only that which can be made into matzah can become chametz. Flour of that type alone is marked by the special rule that a portion of the dough must be set aside, a rule known as hafrashat challah, or simply challah, right? So when you make a challah, you take that little portion and you set it aside, right? All right. There are 5 things that must have challah taken from them: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. If one eats of them an olive's worth of matzah on Pesach, so just a small amount, one has fulfilled one's obligation. Okay. Golly, I'm sorry. I'm going to move you guys over because it's here we go. Okay. So the Talmudic discussion, short and clear. Rice and, so those that we just mentioned, yes. Rice and millet, no. From where in the Torah do we learn this? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, I don't know, said, and so they taught in the house of Rabbi Yishmael and in the house of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the verse, you shall not eat chametz with it, the Passover offering. For 7 days thereafter, you shall eat matzah. Foods that become leavened through man's efforts can be used to fulfill the obligation of eating matzah. This comes to exclude things that do not become chametz, but rather decay, sirahon. Okay. And they checked and found that nothing can become matzah or chametz except these 5 species of grain. All the other species do not become, right? These things, they only decay. So clear in the Mishnah and Talmud, this was codified as law in all 4 of the pillars of early medieval Jewish law that served as the legal references. Okay. So interesting, all 4 halachic sources mention the finding recorded in the Yerushalmi that kidney oat cannot become chametz, along with their recording of the permission to use them on Pesach. So there's this very ancient source that says, yeah, you can do this. These kidney oat are fine. Kidney oat may be eaten on Pesach, okay? So why did the Ashkenazi avoid eating them? Here's the big question. Okay. There are those who prohibit eating rice and all sorts of kidney oat in a cooked dish because varieties of wheat mix into them. This is an excessive stricture and it is not customary to do so. Though writing in Spain, he was Ashkenazi and well aware of the customs there. It's unclear when he reported that avoiding kidney oat was not customary, whether he had in mind Spain, where he resided, or intended to rule for all of Jewry. So in early medieval Ashkenazi, the custom of avoiding kidney oat seemed to have aroused some debate. The most sustained discussion of this can be found in the comments of Rabbeinu Peretz, who's French, and his teacher. Okay, so they write, concerning kidney oat, our rabbis customarily prohibit altogether eating them on Pesach, but many great sages permit them. So this particular teacher would eat the white bean called favas and said that he did so in the name of great sages. And he cited as proof that even rice, about which the Talmud briefly fine, the Talmud said no one considers this to be true. It is very difficult to permit a thing that everyone since the earliest sages treats as prohibited, for surely they did not prohibit. I'm sorry, why did that just move? I lost my place. Surely they didn't, here I am, for they did not err in a matter clear to the most elementary student okay. So basically he's saying, that, so here, it appears that we should support the custom and prohibit all kitniot on Pesach, not as true chametz, that is an error, but as a decree, because kitniot are cooked as grain is cooked in a porridge. And were we to permit kitniot, people might come to substitute and permit grain-based porridge, blah, 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 blah. It's like, holy mackerel, people, come on. How hard are you trying to make it for us? This is how my sisters and I viewed this. So, and this goes back. So the restrictive side of this debate won the day. And we're talking how many centuries ago, right? So anyway, some prohibit, the custom is to be restrictive, but I like this one. All this is nothing but added restriction. One should not diverge from it because they were accustomed to behave this way. It's like, oh, we're never allowed to change, right? So the dispute in the 13th century France arose again in 18th century, right? The custom of avoiding kitniot on Pesach. So here I testify that my illustrious father, that sainted man, suffered greatly on account of this. Throughout Hag HaMatzot, he would rant and say, if I had the strength, I would abolish this terrible custom, a stringency which causes harm and error. Because types of kitniot are not available for the masses to eat their fill, they must bake much matzah. Because of this, they are not as careful with the dough as they should be, and they certainly err in a matter of karet. And matzah is expensive. Not everyone can afford as much as they need, but kitniot are available cheaply and easily and are permitted, so that they come to prevent the joy of the holiday through this stricture that has no reason. Therefore, I say, he who cancels this custom of avoiding eating kitniot, I shall be with him. Hopefully, other great scholars in this place will agree with me. All my days I have waited anxiously. When will I have the opportunity to publicize my father's views to overturn this line of strictures that the public cannot abide? So let's see where they come out. Obviously, we know where they come out, but they keep giving us the back and the forth, right? He admits that his father never acted to overturn the prohibition. So, you know, and this is how the Rabbinical Assembly goes through it, all of this research. So here, citing the case, his desire to release the prohibition, citing Maimonides, that even where the original justification for a ruling has lapsed, a greater court is required to overturn it, where there is harm being caused by the older practice. So with regard to the decree of kitniot, which has spread among us, among all Ashkenazim, in such a case, even if the reason is no longer valid, even if we now have a reason to overturn the original enactment, on account of this decree, it is difficult to fulfill the joy of the holiday as one should, and even though it might lead to transgressing, and it is only a greater court that the originators spread consider. Okay, so there's no possibility of overturning it, they're saying, because it is spread too widely, right? An attempt to permit kitniot 1 year due to famine, right? So, you know, we suffered greatly, honestly. And okay, so, but here, this Rabbinical Assembly Teshuvah says, the basic law that would permit kitniot is clear, but so is the custom of the Ashkenazi since at least the 13th century and perhaps before. The question remains, are we beholden to the custom of our ancestors in medieval Ashkenaz, as is the advice of these people? If, of course, the reason for their custom remained applicable to us, then we would answer yes, without a doubt. We have already encountered 3 different answers, however, and it appears from the language of the writers that the reason, even in their day, had been lost to history. Rabbeinu Peretz suggests that permitting kitniot could be confused with permitting grains, either because of the mode of their use in porridge or bread, or because of the mode of their storage. That's the one I was taught, the storage. Jacob Bar Asher more confidently asserts that the concern was the possible mixing of the wheat into the kitniot, most likely as a result of their storage in the same bins. David Go Lincoln, the rabbi we know, in his responsum uncovered several other variations. Perhaps, one sage speculates, it was customary to cook kitniot with wheat, and it was considered impossible to permit one without dragging along the other. None of these reasons appear cogent, however, in the present age, when we purchase our flours, rice, and beans in discrete packages, well marked as to their content, under governmental supervision. In such a marketplace, there should be no concern of confusing a permission of kitniot with one of the grains, and it should be eminently possible to prohibit one while permitting the other. Yet as we rule, we seek to maintain the customs of our ancestors, even when the original reasons lapsed. Concerning the continuation of the second day of Yom Tov, a practice begun to account for uncertainty of the calendar, the Talmud concludes in Beitzah 4b that the old practice should continue even after the calendar had been standardized, because the custom of our ancestors is in our hands. Minhag avotenu by Yadenu. And that becomes a well-used principle of Jewish law. But custom can and does change. But most of that is through the operation of cultural and social drift. It proceeds unremarked. While there are communities that insist upon dressing, as did the Jews of Poland several centuries ago, in our community that has been allowed to change. The American Jewish community is not that of medieval Ashkenaz, not in territory, time, nor tenor. Yet we are bidden to be cautious about changing custom, particularly signature custom, particularly custom as hard-won as this custom appears to be, which was the point made again and again by Ashkenazic sages. There must be justification to abandon entrenched custom. Okay, so I like this one. There is another matter, the extremely inflated costs of products under Pesach supervision. I don't know about you gals, but oh my gosh, it used to make me crazy. Susan.
When I was a little kid, my mother would not purchase some of the things. She would check ingredients.
Yeah, well, I understand that. I was shocked several years ago. Well, this happened in my particular, in the Midwest. So it was right before Pesach, and the largest kosher meat slaughterhouse and packager was in Iowa, the one closest. And they had a huge fire, right? And there was a big shortage of everything. And oh my God, the prices were outrageous because of this shortage. So I tell you, I was speechless checking out at the grocery store what I was spending. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars more than I normally would spend. So here he goes on, after saying how inflated the costs are. Were kitniot to be permitted, beans and rice could be served with vegetables and dairy to largely supplant the demand for other packaged products and more expensive sources of protein for those who chose to do so, an option that is significantly limited today. It is a well-known halachic aphorism that the Torah is concerned to protect the money of Israel. I used to holler, to anyone who would listen to me, that they're making Passover only doable for those who have so much extra money. The notion of second dishes, or you have meat and milk second dishes. How many sets of dishes are you supposed to afford? Not to mention the pots and the pans and the utensils. I used to get very upset. Susan.
You all will get a laugh out of this. It's our Kroger store one year, which is Ralph's and I don't know what else, but they're all over the country. But Marlene will know them in Cincinnati, of course. They put the 5-pound package of matzah, Passover matzah, on sale before Passover even started for $3.93.
So
it was gone.
I'm going to
in
tell you
no
the corollary
time.
to that. I'm going to tell you the corollary to that story. So, when it was just my husband, my son, and I, we did not need 5 pounds of matzah. So I would try to buy smaller, single boxes. But the price of a single box was more than the price of 5 pounds. And I was losing my mind. And I'm muttering in the aisle at the grocery store. Maybe this was right before the pandemic. I just don't remember. And there's a man there, a little younger than me, but close in age. And he's looking to buy his mom matzah. He's there because he doesn't care. He doesn't need matzah for him, but he gets his mom ready for Passover. And she totally doesn't need 5 pounds. And so I say to him, you're going to spend way more to buy her the 2 boxes you want than the 5 pounds. That's the dilemma I'm having. I said, how about we split one? And he looks at me. I said, I'm actually very serious. I will split this with you. He says, no, nonsense. Truly, it's for my mom. He bought the 5 pounds. We went to the parking lot. We broke it open. I took 3. He took 2. We were both happy as could be.
ShopRite in Livingston, New Jersey actually gives away that 5 pound boxes of matzah if you spend a certain amount of money.
Wow.
That's so funny. I grew up in West Orange near the Livingston border, and my mother-in-law is like a big ShopRite person. She told me the same thing. They didn't have that when I was growing up.
They do that at Shop and Stop, Giant, that whole chain. You spend $25, you get 5 pounds of matzah.
Yeah.
Mark and I can't eat 5 pounds of matzah in a
Exactly.
year. Never
Right.
mind 8 days.
Well, I
Right.
eat it all year long.
So does Mark. I can't do it. He can, I can't.
I love it.
It's-
I spread
I
stuff
love
on
it
it.
too, but I just somehow can't. He not having the upbringing that I did has
But
no
I
trouble
was,
with cream cheese and jelly on matzah all year round. Loves
I
it.
grew up, I put pimento cheese spread on it. I grew up and was told that I could not have matzah a month before Pesach.
Yeah, you can't eat matzah a week before Pesach.
Right. So we
Well,
used to have it in the house.
Mine was a month.
Right.
Right. We used to have it in the house all the time. And my mother would say the same thing. It's going out. We can't, there's a moratorium now. I didn't really eat it all the time, but somehow it was in the house all the time. So, okay, so let's get to the.
So
I'd like to share that I just got a little box of matzah. What size is it? It's only 5.3 ounces, and it's really, I don't know if it's showing up there, but it's
Yeah.
really half the size.
Yeah.
First time I've ever seen it, and it's just perfect for people that live alone.
Yeah, who don't need a whole
Rabbi
pound.
won't let us use egg matzah.
Well,
Oh, really?
I won't either.
well, you
It
can't say,
says it's marked for Passover.
yes, so you can eat it during Passover, that you're not supposed to use it during the Seder to say the bracha over.
But he
Most
won't
of
let
them-
us use it
yeah.
at all.
Oh,
Right.
then that won't be a problem. This is just for my personal use.
Right, exactly. I mean. we
Yeah,
were
I'll be at an event. That'll be different.
Right, that was the one kind of matzah my mom would let us have at lunch before the first Seder. So, right, you got no chametz in the house. You're not allowed to eat the regular matzah yet. You could eat the egg matzah with your lunch because you couldn't use the egg matzah for the Seder. So it
And
was.
it
like-
has so much more flavor. It has so much more flavor, the egg matzah. So let's be honest.
But
And why can't you use it for the Seder?
Because it has that additive in it. It's not pure enough. It's not just the grain in the water. It's got egg and it's got something else. It's got another liquid in it.
Okay.
So, all right, let's get to the,
Salt in it too.
Rachel, do you
yeah.
use the rice and corn during Passover? Or
I
you-
do, in my house, I do, absolutely.
you
I
do-
follow this teshuva,
No, okay.
and I'm a much happier person as a
Daughter has
result.
encouraged me, but I haven't done it.
I know people at my shul who still won't budge, but you
My
know what?
son- My son won't do it. He won't
You
allow
know,
it in his house.
there, many people have said to me, kashrut seems to be one of those things where people, we don't all interpret it exactly the same way, but even though it seems to be pretty, cut and dry. But honestly, to me, the Rabbinical Assembly has given me the right, given me the okay. So I follow this. So here he says, conclusion. In order to bring down the cost of making Pesach and support the healthier diet that is now becoming more common, and given the inapplicability of the primary concerns that seem to have led to the prohibition, right? And further, given our inclination in our day to present an accessible Judaism, unencumbered by unneeded prohibitions, more easily able to participate in the culture that surrounds us, we are prepared to rely on the fundamental observance recorded in the Talmud and permit the eating of kitniot on Pesach. That's the other thing, is that we were losing people in droves over this issue. So
Interesting.
fresh corn on the cob and fresh beans, lima beans in their pods, may be purchased before and during, treated like any other vegetable. Dried kitniot, corn can be purchased bagged or in boxes and then sifted or sorted before Pesach. I'm not sure what he's getting at there. These should ideally not be purchased in bulk from bins. Yes, okay, because you don't want them contaminated. In any case, one should inspect before Pesach, of course. Okay. Kitniot in cans may only be purchased with the Passover certification because of the canning process. Yada, yada, yada. Frozen raw kitniot, corn, soybeans. One may purchase bags of frozen non-hechshered kitniot before Pesach, provided one can either absolutely determine no shared equipment was used. Right. So again, based on how things are processed in our country, they make it very clear on the packages, right? This is processed foods, including tofu, although containing no listed chametz, continue to require a Pesach certification due to the possibility of contamination. Okay, even those who continue to observe the Ashkenazic custom of eschewing kitniot during Pesach may eat from Pesach dishes, utensils, and cooking vessels that have come into contact with kitniot and may consume kitniot derivatives like oil. Interesting. Okay. I know that was a very deep dive, but I have to tell you honestly that I get great pleasure out of that teshuva. Anyway, I have seen in my own children the difference in now that we can have kitniot and how the weight of the holiday does not make them say, the heck with the whole darn thing, I just can't, and I'm outside of the house, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I appreciate that. So, questions, comments?
Yeah.
Yes, Audrey.
Yeah, the health aspect was what really got to me. It's really not a healthful diet, the traditional Passover diet. Matzah itself is worthless. And
Totally.
yeah. So,
and it turns to concrete in my system.
right. And all that meat. So I've got to hand it to them. The fact that they acknowledge that some people eschew meat and even fish. And the fact that refined grains are, I don't know, they went into the fact that refined grains aren't good for you, but it's like eating white sugar, for your body. So I loved the switch. Obviously my Orthodox cousins haven't changed anything, but
you're not a pagan because you have.
Exactly. I have to check with my rabbi because I think I might have mentioned this a couple of years ago or a year ago in class, but I was with him right after it came, the edict came out, and he said, I'm not changing, but I wonder whether he still feels the same way. And I'm curious to find out, but I'm so grateful because now you really can have a very healthful Passover.
Marjorie?
I used to say that for 8 days a year, I was Sephardic, but with the change in excuse me, in 215,
Yeah.
I was thrilled. I'm not a rice eater. I don't particularly like rice, but the idea of being able to eat it, my husband loves rice, was good for both of us. Made life a lot easier for 8 days. My son, on the other hand, will not change. He will not have
Mhm.
anything in his house that wasn't there when he was a child.
So the first year, so
But his
20
wife was raised Reform, and she's slowly inching her way into his thinking. So
Oh,
that I'm
gosh.
hoping each year when we join them for Passover, we might see rice
Well, so the first
or
year,
something else.
2016, my sister and I talked about it, and it's really, she's my older sister, and Passover's always at my house, and we had a in-depth talk about it, and she was willing, absolutely, bring them all in. I'm fine with any of it. I couldn't bring myself to serve them at the Seder table,
No,
but
not
certainly
at the
by the-
Seder table, but for
But
other days.
by the end of the holiday, it's like, you bet we're having rice tonight, honey. So, but now, you know what? I'm even willing to have them at the Seder table because.
No, that's too much for me, Seder
Okay.
table. I'm a potato person, so this was never really all that
Well, I
relevant.
agree with you. I love potatoes, but I gotta tell you, by the end of the holiday, I just can't look at another potato.
Yeah.
So, Geraldine, you missed some interesting stuff early on. That's quite all right. But you being so new to all of this is what, only your second Passover?
It's my third Passover.
Okay.
I came almost right on time for the first one,
Okay.
and that was interesting.
There's so much, Passover is literally so full of rules, and people disagree, is kind of what we're talking about here, is that the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, they disagreed for 800 years, and now the Rabbinical Assembly back in 2015 said we could all do it the same way, but people haven't totally embraced it. Some people still say, no, I'm doing it the way we always did it for all those 800 years. I am a forward thinker and say thank you. I'm embracing all those things that you used to tell me were against it because of reasons that don't exist anymore. So, anywho, I will share the document. I will attach it to the notes.
I'd like to read it again.
Yeah.
I think I have that document and some other resources, because I was like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, what? I agree with you. Totally.
The Rabbinic Assembly puts out a guide every year, but I think last year it didn't change at all from the year before.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure that they're going to do a new one this year or just keep the same one, but we'll find out.
Well, interestingly, so my synagogue puts out their Passover guide. It's sort of a supplement to the, I don't know, 4 times a year or 5 times a year mailing that they send us, right? And I don't think they've changed on Kitniyot. Even though the Rabbinical Assembly has, I don't believe they have. So.
What about when they declared cheese kosher? That's another biggie. Remember that?
Yeah, when was that?
All cheese is now kosher.
Right.
I never knew anything about that.
Yeah.
It was what was it, about
Right.
10 years ago, maybe? It was after we moved to It moved from Babylon to Maryland, so it has to be less than 15.
But
Probably
the
about
point,
10.
the point you're making is whether it requires a hechsher or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Well, the Rabbinical Assembly declared that all cheese is now kosher because the amount of run in it is so small that it's insignificant.
I'll try to find that and send it too. I'm sure I can find it.
You remember hearing it though, right?
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I remember our previous rabbi only allowed kosher cheese into the kitchen, but our new rabbi, who's now been there almost 20 years,
Still called new though.
Of course.
he allowed any cheese from the beginning.
Some of the synagogues that I visit in my role as region president allow cheese, and some of them don't allow any cheese because you never know.
So that's
It's
the thing
weird.
about that was the reference I was making about kashrut, is that even though the rules seem to be the rules, the interpretation of the rules causes people to have vastly different opinions,
Mhm.
which, makes socializing with them over a meal challenging, which going out to eat is already challenging because, some will go to a vegan restaurant, but they won't go to any other restaurant. Some will go to any restaurant, but they'll only eat vegetarian, or maybe they'll eat fish. I mean, it's just all over the place.
Mhm.
And we can't just socialize at restaurants in Israel, right? That's not reasonable for those of us who don't live there.